In the heart of a picturesque suburban community, where tree-lined streets and neatly manicured lawns create an inviting atmosphere, life seemed idyllic. Families strolled on sidewalks, neighbors exchanged friendly waves, and children played in the parks, their laughter echoing through the air. This was a neighborhood that prided itself on its sense of community, where everyone knew each other, or so it appeared. At the center of this harmonious environment stood the Homeowners Association, or HOA, a governing body tasked with maintaining the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood. With a set of stringent rules and regulations, the HOA aimed to ensure that every home adhered to specific standards. From paint colors to fence heights, nothing escaped their watchful eye. While some residents appreciated the order it provided, others felt stifled by what they perceived as overreach. The initial dynamics between residents were seemingly cordial. However, beneath the surface lay a growing tension. Many homeowners, eager to preserve their property values and maintain a certain image, began to feel the weight of the HOA's authority. The board members, often composed of self-appointed leaders with varying degrees of experience in community governance, wielded their power with a mix of zeal and rigidity. Their decisions often sparked debates at monthly meetings, where frustration simmered just below the surface. Among the residents was my mother, a kind-hearted woman in her late 60s who had lived in this neighborhood for decades. With a warm smile and a gentle disposition, she was beloved by many for her willingness to help anyone in need. Yet few knew about her remarkable past as a karate champion. In her youth, she had trained rigorously in martial arts, earning accolades and recognition for her skills. Although her competitive days were behind her, the discipline and strength she gained from karate shaped her character and resilience. As time went on, my mother began to notice changes in how the HOA operated. What started as benign reminders about lawn maintenance quickly escalated into confrontations over trivial matters, like the placement of flower pots on her porch or the color of her shutters. The HOA's intrusive nature became increasingly burdensome. My mother received letters filled with warnings and fines for what seemed like petty infractions. Each correspondence chipped away at her spirit, filling her with anxiety and uncertainty. It was heartbreaking to witness my strong-willed mother being bullied by an organization that should have been fostering community harmony. The fear that gripped her was palpable. She felt trapped in her own home by an invisible force that dictated every aspect of her life. I could see how this relentless pressure dimmed her once vibrant spirit. Yet amidst this turmoil lay a flicker of hope, one that would soon ignite an unexpected journey of empowerment and courage. Little did the HOA know that behind my mother's gentle exterior was a fierce warrior, ready to reclaim her voice and stand up for herself against their unjust tactics. As we navigated this challenging situation together, I couldn't help but wonder how much my mom's old skills could come into play as we prepared to confront this unwarranted bullying head-on. My mother, Margaret, is a remarkable woman whose spirit is as vibrant as the garden she tends to every spring. At 68, she embodies warmth and kindness, always ready to lend a hand or listen to a neighbor in need. Her laugh is infectious, often filling our home with a sense of joy that resonates through the walls. Known for her homemade cookies and nurturing nature, she has earned the affectionate title of neighborhood grandma among the children who flock to her yard during summer. Yet beneath this gentle exterior lies an extraordinary past, one that few in our community are aware of. In her youth, my mother was a karate champion, exhibiting strength and determination that belied her petite frame. She began training in martial arts at the age of 15, drawn to the discipline and focus it required. Throughout her teenage years, she competed in various tournaments, earning medals and accolades that showcased her talent. With each victory, she not only honed her physical abilities, but also cultivated a powerful sense of self-confidence. Karate was more than just a sport for my mother. It became a way of life. The principles she learned, respect, perseverance, and self-control, shaped her character and influenced how she approached challenges. During her competitive years, she faced opponents who were often larger and more aggressive, yet she never backed down. Her tenacity earned her respect in the dojo and beyond, instilling a deep belief that anyone could overcome obstacles with dedication and hard work. As life progressed, marriage and motherhood took center stage. She eventually stepped away from formal competitions, choosing to focus on raising my siblings and me. However, the lessons from those karate classes never left her. They remained woven into the fabric of her being, guiding her through life's ups and downs. The discipline fostered by martial arts helped her navigate the challenges of parenthood, while maintaining an unwavering sense of calm. Even now, at 68 years old, my mother practices karate regularly, though not in the way you'd expect. Instead of competing or training for trophies, she incorporates movements into her daily routine. A series of stretches here or some basic katas there serve as reminders of her strengths and capabilities. Those moments of practice bring back memories of her younger self, filled with energy and confidence, reminding her that she still possesses that fighting spirit. Yet, as the HOA's bullying escalated, I could see the shadows creeping into her once bright demeanor. The confident woman who had faced down opponents on the mat was starting to feel small under the weight of harassment from neighbors who had taken their roles too far. It pained me to see how quickly fear can overshadow resilience. I knew that if anyone could confront this situation head-on, it was my mother, the karate champion hiding in plain sight. While she may have settled into a quieter life in our suburban home, I understood that deep within her was a warrior ready to reclaim her narrative against an unjust foe. It was time for me to help her rediscover that strength and stand tall against the HOA that underestimated both her spirit and abilities. Little did they know they were about to encounter more than just a homeowner. They were about to face a champion armed with courage and conviction. As the weeks passed, the once peaceful atmosphere of our neighborhood began to shift. What started as friendly reminders about maintaining property standards soon escalated into a series of unreasonable demands directed at my mother. The HOA, emboldened by its authority, began to impose rules that felt more like bullying than community governance. The first incident occurred when my mother decided to update her front yard. Inspired by the vibrant blooms of spring, she planted a colorful array of flowers that brought life to her home. To her dismay, a letter arrived just days later from the HOA. It detailed how her flower choices violated their strict landscaping guidelines and threatened a fine if she didn't rectify the situation. Confused and disheartened, my mother pored over the rules but found no clear violation. The flowers were simply an expression of her joy and creativity. A few weeks later, the HOA took things further. When my mother installed a decorative bird feeder, something she had long dreamed of doing, their response was swift and harsh. They claimed it obstructed the view of her neighbors and mandated its removal. Again, she felt targeted for wanting to create a welcoming environment in her own yard. Each letter carried with it not just fines but an underlying message. She was being watched, and her choices were under scrutiny. But it didn't stop there. One afternoon, while tending to her garden, my mother noticed an HOA representative walking past her property, clipboard in hand. It was clear that they were conducting inspections, looking for any perceived infractions among residents. A week later, another letter arrived, citing complaints about her mailbox being outdated and demanding an immediate replacement or face further fines. My mother had always viewed her mailbox as a part of her home's charm. It was a piece of history that held memories of years gone by. These incidents took a toll on her spirit. Each letter felt like a personal attack rather than a mere enforcement of community regulations. My mother began to dread checking the mailbox, knowing it might hold another unwelcome reminder of the HOA's overreach. The once vibrant woman who filled our home with laughter now carried an air of anxiety and uncertainty. The final straw came when they targeted an innocent garden gnome she had received as a gift from a dear friend. The HOA deemed it offensive and not aesthetically pleasing, demanding its removal within 5 days or facing escalating fines. It was absurd. A beloved trinket that had brightened her garden was suddenly deemed problematic by faceless individuals who didn't know her or what that gnome represented. As I witnessed these relentless attacks on my mother, I felt both anger and despair. The very essence of community was being twisted into something punitive and controlling. It became clear that this wasn't just about superficial rules. It was about power dynamics and intimidation tactics that preyed on vulnerable residents like my mother. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I knew we had to confront this injustice together. The HOA may have assumed they could bully my mom without consequence, but they were gravely mistaken about the woman they were dealing with, an unassuming elderly lady who had spent years cultivating resilience through karate training. I couldn't wait for her to show them just how strong she truly was, as we prepared to stand up against their unreasonable behavior. As the HOA continued its relentless campaign against my mother, I watched in dismay as the emotional and psychological toll began to weigh heavily on her. The once bright spark in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a growing cloud of fear and anxiety. Each letter from the HOA felt like a personal attack, chipping away at her confidence and peace of mind. Where she had once radiated warmth and joy, she now exuded a sense of unease that was palpable. In the early days of their harassment, my mother tried to brush it off with a smile, insisting that she wouldn't let them get to her. But as the fines piled up and the demands grew more unreasonable, that bravado began to wane. She would sit quietly at the kitchen table, staring at the latest notice with trembling hands, her mind racing with worries about what could come next. Would they fine her for her beloved garden gnome? Would they come knocking on her door next? The sense of uncertainty gnawed at her, turning what was once a safe haven into a source of stress. Even simple activities became fraught with tension. Gardening, something she had always found solace in, turned into an anxious chore. She would glance over her shoulder as if expecting an HOA representative to appear at any moment, clipboard in hand. The joy of nurturing her flowers was overshadowed by the fear of being reprimanded for something trivial. It was heartbreaking to witness this fierce woman, who had faced challenges on so many levels in her life, now feeling so vulnerable and small. My mother's anxiety seeped into our conversations. She would express doubts about whether she was living up to community standards or if she had unknowingly offended someone with her choices. I saw glimpses of the confident karate champion she once was, an indomitable spirit that had faced opponents larger than life. But those memories were becoming distant echoes against the backdrop of her current struggles. In stark contrast to the fear gripping her now were the memories I held of my mother during her karate days. I recalled how she had stood tall in the dojo, unyielding against formidable opponents with unwavering determination. She had embodied strength and resilience, demonstrating not just physical prowess but also mental fortitude that inspired everyone around her. The lessons learned through martial arts empowered her not only on the mat but throughout life's many challenges. I longed for her to reclaim that fierce spirit, the same one that made her a champion years ago. I wanted to remind her that those qualities were still within her. They hadn't disappeared beneath layers of fear imposed by an overreaching HOA. It became increasingly clear to me that my mother needed more than just support. She required a catalyst to reignite that fire within. It was time for us to draw on those memories of strength and resilience as we prepared to confront this unjust situation together. The HOA may have underestimated the woman they were bullying, but I knew my mother carried within her a tenacity forged through years of training and competition. As we navigated this difficult chapter, I made it my mission to help her rediscover that indomitable spirit, reminding her of the fierce karate champion who refused to back down in the face of adversity. Together, we would show the HOA exactly who they were dealing with and reclaim my mother's power one step at a time. One evening, as I rummaged through the attic searching for some old family photos, I stumbled upon a dusty box that piqued my curiosity. The moment I opened it, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. Inside, I found a collection of medals, trophies, and certificates, each one a testament to my mother's past achievements in karate. I had seen her teaching me the basics of self-defense when I was younger, but never had I fully grasped the extent of her talent and dedication. Among the treasures was a worn-out scrapbook filled with newspaper clippings and photographs from her competition days. There she was, standing proudly on podiums, clutching trophies that sparkled in the light. As I flipped through the pages, I could almost hear her laughter and feel the energy of those moments when she had triumphed over challenges far greater than any neighborhood dispute. Suddenly, it struck me like a bolt of lightning. My mother was not just any ordinary resident. She was a seasoned fighter who had faced down opponents with courage and skill. This realization ignited something deep within me, a sense of hope and determination. If anyone could stand up to the HOA's bullying, it was my mother, the karate champion who had already proven herself time and again. With newfound fervor, I rushed downstairs to find her in the living room, lost in thought as she stared out the window. "Mom!" I exclaimed, holding up one of the medals for her to see. "Look what I found." Her eyes widened with surprise as she took in the familiar emblem. "Oh my goodness! Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice laced with nostalgia. "In the attic. You were incredible. Look at all these achievements," I continued, flipping through the scrapbook and sharing each memory with her. As we reminisced about her past victories and experiences in martial arts, I watched as her demeanor slowly shifted. The anxiety that had clouded her expression began to lift as pride replaced it. "Those days seem so far away," she said softly, almost wistfully. "But they're still part of you," I urged. "You have the strength inside you, just like back then. You've faced challenges before and come out on top. The HOA may think they can bully you because they see you as just an elderly woman, but they have no idea who they're really dealing with." As we spoke, an ember of determination sparked in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, I saw that familiar fire igniting within her. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "karate taught me more than just fighting techniques. It taught me about standing up for myself and not being afraid to defend what's right." In that moment, everything shifted. We began to formulate a plan, not just to confront the HOA but to empower my mother to reclaim her space and voice in this community. She would attend the next HOA meeting armed not only with knowledge of their rules but also with the fierce spirit of a champion ready to stand her ground. Together, we mapped out strategies for how she would respond to their accusations and articulate her case for fairness in front of her neighbors. It was time for her to embrace her identity as both a resident and a warrior, an embodiment of strength that would inspire not just herself but others around her. As we finalized our plans that night, I felt an overwhelming sense of excitement mixed with anticipation. The woman who had been bullied for too long was ready to rise up once more, not just for herself but for anyone else who felt marginalized or silenced by those who wielded power unjustly. My mom would face the HOA with courage blazing brightly within her, ready to remind them that she was more than just a homeowner. She was a karate champion prepared to fight back against oppression. With our plan in motion, I wanted to ensure my mother was fully prepared to confront the HOA. It was time to reignite her passion for karate and help her reclaim the confidence that had been overshadowed by fear. We transformed our backyard into a makeshift dojo, clearing away garden tools and setting up a space where she could practice. Our first training session began on a sunny Saturday morning. My mom stood nervously on the grass, wearing an old karate gi that had long been tucked away in the attic. As I adjusted her belt, I could see a flicker of excitement mingled with apprehension in her eyes. "Just like old times," I said, trying to ease her nerves. I guided her through some basic warm-up exercises, encouraging her to stretch and focus on her breathing. As we moved together, I could sense the tension slowly melting away. We started with simple punches and kicks, and with each movement, I saw her confidence begin to grow. The familiar rhythm of training was awakening something deep within her, a connection to the powerful fighter she had once been. As days turned into weeks, our training sessions became a cherished ritual. Each session began with laughter as we attempted to execute katas together, sometimes stumbling, but always finding joy in the process. "Remember this one?" I'd ask as we practiced a sequence she had mastered decades ago. Her face would light up with recognition, followed by a chuckle as she recalled how she'd once performed these moves flawlessly. Gradually, my mother's demeanor transformed. The anxiety that had previously consumed her began to fade as she embraced the discipline and strength that karate had instilled in her long ago. Her movements became more fluid, her strikes sharper. I watched in awe as she executed a roundhouse kick with surprising precision, a testament to her enduring spirit. One afternoon, while practicing outside, we decided to introduce some light sparring into our sessions. "Let's see what you've got," I teased playfully as we faced off in our backyard dojo. My mother's eyes sparkled with mischief as she grinned back at me. "Don't underestimate me," she challenged, and we both burst into laughter. As we sparred, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride watching her rediscover her strength and agility. Each time she landed a kick or blocked my advances, it was as if she were shedding layers of doubt that had accumulated over the past months. The fierce warrior within her was awakening once again. During one of our sessions, I encouraged her to visualize herself standing up to the HOA representatives during the upcoming meeting. Imagine them looking at you with respect, I suggested as she practiced her stances. Picture yourself speaking confidently about your rights as a homeowner. Her focus sharpened at my words, and I noticed her posture straightening even more as if she was preparing for battle. Not just against me, but against those who sought to intimidate her. She began to channel that energy into her movements, each strike echoing with determination. By the end of our training montage, my mother had transformed from a woman weighed down by fear into a fierce contender ready to reclaim her voice. The bond we shared deepened through this experience. It wasn't just about karate anymore. It was about empowerment and resilience. As our final training session approached before the HOA meeting, I couldn't help but feel both anxious and excited for what lay ahead. My mother had come so far from the frightened woman who had once felt helpless against their bullying tactics. Now, she stood tall, ready to face whatever challenge awaited her with the heart of a champion and the spirit of a warrior. Together, we would walk into that meeting side by side, ready to make our voices heard loud and clear. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and an electric tension hung in the air. My mother and I prepared together, her old karate gi neatly pressed and her stance more confident than I had ever seen it. The growth I had witnessed in her over the last few weeks was palpable. She was no longer the anxious woman who had cowered under the HOA's scrutiny. Instead, she stood tall, ready to assert herself and reclaim her dignity. As we walked into the community center, the familiar faces of the HOA board members greeted us with a mix of disdain and curiosity. They were accustomed to pushing residents around, but they were about to meet a different kind of homeowner today. My heart raced as we took our seats among the other residents, many of whom looked on with interest, sensing the tension building in the room. The meeting began with the usual agenda items: updates on lawn care rules, pool regulations, and neighborhood events. As the board members droned on about fines for minor infractions, I could see my mother's jaw set with determination. It was time for her to speak up. When the moment finally arrived for residents to voice their concerns, my mother raised her hand. The board chair looked surprised but gestured for her to proceed. "I'd like to address some issues I've been facing," she began, her voice steady but firm. As she spoke about the unreasonable fines and harassment she had endured, I could feel a shift in the room. The audience leaned in, captivated by her courage. She recounted each incident: the letters about her flowers, the complaints about her bird feeder, and the absurd demand regarding her beloved garden gnome. With every word, she painted a picture of a woman who had been unjustly bullied by an organization that was supposed to foster community. But then came the moment that caught everyone off guard. Drawing on her karate training, my mother decided to showcase some of her skills right there in front of them. "You see," she said confidently as she stepped back from the podium and into a stance, "karate has taught me how to stand up for myself." The audience gasped as she executed a series of precise movements, a flowing kata that highlighted both grace and strength. Her kicks sliced through the air with authority, embodying years of discipline and hard work. The board members exchanged bewildered glances, while some residents erupted into applause. "Just as I wouldn't let an opponent intimidate me on the mat," my mother continued after finishing her demonstration, "I refuse to be intimidated by this HOA." Her voice resonated throughout the room as she pointedly turned to each member of the board. "I deserve respect just like everyone else here." With each passing moment, it became clear that this wasn't just a confrontation. It was a declaration of independence for all those who had felt marginalized or bullied in their own homes. My mother's bravery inspired others in attendance to speak out about their own grievances, creating an unexpected wave of solidarity against the board's overreach. As voices rose around us in support of my mother's stand, I felt immense pride swell within me. Here was not just my mom but a fierce warrior rallying others to reclaim their rights as homeowners in this community. The atmosphere shifted from one of intimidation to empowerment, a collective realization that they didn't have to accept unjust treatment. In that pivotal moment, my mother transformed from a target of bullying into a symbol of strength and resilience for everyone present. The HOA board members were visibly shaken by her assertiveness and unexpected display of skill. They were no longer dealing with an elderly woman but with a champion who refused to be silenced. As we left the meeting that night, I could see the light back in my mother's eyes, an unwavering spirit reawakened by courage and community support. The confrontation had not only signified her personal victory, but also ignited hope within others who had similarly felt powerless against oppressive authority. Together, we had taken a bold stand against bullying, and my mother had shown them all just how fierce she truly was. As the dust settled from the HOA meeting, the atmosphere in our community began to shift dramatically. My mother's courageous stand had ignited a spark among residents who had long felt powerless against the board's overreach. The cheers and applause that had erupted during her demonstration were just the beginning. They signaled a newfound unity in our neighborhood. Word spread quickly about my mother's fearless confrontation. Over the next few days, neighbors began reaching out to express their support, many sharing their own stories of feeling bullied or intimidated by the HOA. A group of residents organized an impromptu gathering in the park, inviting everyone to come together to discuss the issues that had been plaguing our community for far too long. At the gathering, it was clear that my mother's bravery had given people a voice they didn't know they had. Residents who had previously kept their heads down and accepted the status quo were now animatedly discussing their grievances. One neighbor spoke about receiving fines for her garden decorations, while another recounted being pressured to replace perfectly functional outdoor furniture because it didn't match the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. As stories flowed freely, it became apparent that my mother's confrontation had opened the floodgates. People began sharing not only their frustrations but also ideas for how they could collectively advocate for change. The energy in the park crackled with enthusiasm and determination. It was as if a long-dormant spirit of community activism had been awakened. My mother stood at the center of this gathering, surrounded by neighbors who now looked at her with admiration and respect. No longer just the grandmother of the neighborhood, she had become a symbol of resilience and empowerment. As she listened to her friends share their experiences, I could see her confidence grow even more. Each story resonated with her, reminding her that she was not alone in her struggle, but rather part of a larger movement toward fairness and accountability. Fueled by this newfound camaraderie, we decided to take action. A few residents volunteered to help draft a petition demanding changes to HOA policies regarding harassment and fines. They wanted clarity on what constituted violations and a more transparent process for addressing grievances. It was heartening to see so many people rallying behind my mother's cause, an entire community coming together to stand against injustice. As we worked on the petition, I watched friendships blossom among neighbors who had previously only exchanged polite nods. Conversations deepened as they shared meals, laughter, and stories under the shade of trees in the park. My mom made new connections with younger families who were eager to lend their voices to this cause, showing that age was no barrier to standing up for one's rights. The impact of my mother's bravery rippled throughout our neighborhood and beyond. Local news outlets caught wind of our movement, featuring stories about how residents were banding together against an overreaching HOA. As more attention came our way, it became increasingly difficult for the board members to dismiss us or continue their bullying tactics unnoticed. With each passing day, a palpable shift occurred in how residents viewed both my mother and the HOA. Where fear once reigned supreme, empowerment took root instead. Neighbors began approaching board members with newfound assertiveness, questioning decisions that felt unjust and demanding accountability for past actions. In just a matter of weeks, we transformed from individuals living under a cloud of intimidation into a united front determined to reclaim our sense of community. My mother had not only stood up for herself, she had inspired others to rise up collectively. Together, we were crafting a narrative of resilience that would redefine our neighborhood, a place where kindness prevailed over oppression and where everyone's voice mattered equally. The HOA may have thought they could bully us into submission, but now they were faced with an empowered community ready to fight back with strength and solidarity. In the weeks following my mother's courageous confrontation at the HOA meeting, the transformation within our neighborhood was nothing short of remarkable. The once untouchable board members found themselves under increased scrutiny, not just from my mother but from an entire community that had rallied behind her. The atmosphere had shifted. Fear and intimidation were being replaced with empowerment and unity. The first sign of change came when the HOA board held their next meeting. Traditionally a space where residents remained silent, this time, it was filled with voices demanding accountability. Neighbors who had once been hesitant to speak up now confidently addressed their concerns, echoing my mother's sentiments about transparency and fairness. The board members, faced with a united front, could no longer dismiss residents' grievances as trivial complaints. As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that the HOA was forced to adapt. They began to revise some of their policies, implementing clearer guidelines regarding fines and enforcement. A new rule was established requiring them to notify residents of any issues before imposing fines, allowing homeowners the opportunity to rectify situations without fear of punishment. It felt like a small victory, but it signaled a significant shift in how they engaged with our community. The respect for my mother grew exponentially as her bravery became a talking point among residents. People began approaching her in grocery stores and at community events, thanking her for standing up against bullying. She became a local hero in many ways, a symbol of resilience that inspired others to advocate for themselves and their neighbors. Friends old and new congratulated her on her strength, and she wore her newfound status with grace and humility. But it wasn't just about her. This newfound respect extended to everyone in our community who had felt marginalized or overlooked by the HOA's previous actions. My mother's stand had given voice to those who had been silenced for too long, fostering an environment where every resident felt empowered to express their concerns. In response to this positive shift, our neighborhood began organizing regular community meetings aimed at promoting engagement and collaboration between residents. These gatherings became opportunities for residents to share ideas about improving our community while addressing any lingering issues with the HOA in a constructive manner. The focus was no longer on compliance but rather on building a supportive environment where everyone felt valued. The friendships that blossomed during this time were heartwarming. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged pleasantries began forming bonds over shared interests. Gardening clubs sprang up, book clubs formed, and weekend barbecues became common occurrences. Our neighborhood transformed into a vibrant tapestry of connections that emphasized collaboration over conformity. My mother took an active role in these community initiatives, using her experience as both a champion and a mentor to help others find their voices. She organized self-defense workshops for women and children, empowering them with skills she had honed through years of training. The dojo spirit she had embraced in her youth now permeated our community, as she encouraged others to embrace their inner strength. As we looked around at the changes unfolding within our neighborhood, we realized it was more than just policy shifts. It was a fundamental change in culture. Where once there had been fear and compliance under the shadow of the HOA's authority, there now existed a sense of camaraderie and respect among neighbors. Through my mother's bravery, we had not only confronted injustice but also cultivated a supportive environment that encouraged open dialogue and respect for one another's rights. The HOA may have initially attempted to stifle us, but they ultimately helped spark a movement that brought our community closer together. A legacy of empowerment that would resonate for generations to come. My mother had become more than just a resident. She was now an agent of change in our neighborhood, inspiring all of us to stand tall and united against adversity. As we settled into the comfortable routine of our transformed neighborhood, my mother and I took a moment to reflect on the incredible journey we had just experienced. Sitting together on the porch, a warm breeze rustling the leaves, we reminisced about how far we had come, from the initial fear that gripped her to the empowering confrontation at the HOA meeting that had changed everything. "Do you remember how afraid I was before all this started?" my mother asked, her eyes glimmering with warmth and wisdom. "I felt so small, like I didn't matter. It's amazing how one person standing up can ignite change." I nodded, recalling those early days when she felt overwhelmed by the HOA's intimidation tactics. "You showed us all what it means to be brave," I replied. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for everyone who felt silenced. You reminded us that our voices matter." We learned that resilience is more than just enduring tough times. It's about fighting back when something feels wrong, she said thoughtfully, her voice steady and confident. The karate principles I learned so long ago, discipline, respect, and perseverance, came flooding back when I needed them most. It's a powerful reminder that those lessons are timeless. Our conversation turned toward the sense of community that had blossomed in the aftermath of her confrontation. I never expected to connect with so many neighbors, she remarked, a smile breaking across her face. It's wonderful to see people coming together, sharing their stories, and supporting one another. We've built something beautiful here. Indeed, our neighborhood had transformed from a collection of individual homes into a thriving community bound by shared experiences and mutual respect. Residents now looked out for one another, sharing not only concerns but also joys. A potluck here, a holiday celebration there. The energy was infectious, fostering an environment where everyone felt empowered to contribute. Standing up for ourselves has created a ripple effect, I said, reflecting on how my mother's bravery had inspired others to find their voices as well. It's incredible how your actions challenged the status quo and encouraged others to speak out against injustices in their own lives. My mother nodded in agreement, her spirit radiating warmth. And in doing so, we have forged deeper connections with each other. This journey has made me realize that we are stronger together than we are apart. When we lift each other up, we create a community where everyone thrives. As our conversation continued, I recognized the profound bond that had formed between us throughout this experience. Our shared journey had not only empowered my mother, but also deepened our relationship in ways I hadn't anticipated. We had faced challenges side by side, learning from one another and growing closer through adversity. I'm grateful for this experience, my mother said softly, placing her hand over mine. It taught me that it's never too late to reclaim your voice and fight for what you believe in, not just for yourself but for others as well. I squeezed her hand back, feeling a surge of pride and admiration for the woman sitting beside me. You've shown me what true strength looks like, I replied earnestly. Your courage has inspired me to stand tall in my own life and advocate for others who may need support. As we sat together on that porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, we knew that our journey was far from over. The lessons learned about resilience and community would continue to resonate within us as we faced new challenges ahead. Together, we had created something lasting, a legacy of courage that would echo through our neighborhood and beyond. My mother had become more than just a karate champion. She was a beacon of hope for all who sought to find their voice in a world that sometimes tried to silence them. In this moment of reflection, we understood that standing up for oneself is not merely an act of defiance, but rather an invitation for others to join in that fight for justice and respect. Through our journey together, we had forged an unbreakable bond, one rooted in love, understanding, and the unwavering belief that together we could overcome anything life threw our way.